Hi friends, welcome to Understanding Plants 101. Today we're going to talk about fertilizers, the macronutrients N, P, and K. And we all want to grow healthy plants. That's why we're so interested in plants. But there's some things that we have to know about plants to be able to grow them properly. The first thing we want to do is dispel the myth about green thumbs and brown thumbs. None of us are just born with the ability to grow things. We have all had knowledge. We've learned things, whether it was passed down from generation to generation, or whether you went to school to learn about it, or watched a YouTube video like this. So let's get started today, and let's talk about the three macronutrients that are in fertilizers that help plants. All right, let's start off with what they are. They're labeled on a package. Whether you get a fertilizer in a bag like this or whether you get a liquid fertilizer, doesn't really matter. They will all have some form of analysis on the three main macronutrients that plants need, which is N, P, and K. And what that stands for is the N stands for nitrogen, the P stands for phosphorus, and the K stands for potassium. So let's start off right now with the nitrogen, and let's understand a little bit about what it does. Nitrogen is considered the building blocks of a plant, of what helps it to grow. One of the first things it does is it's involved with the making of chlorophyll, which is what gives the plant its greenness. Plain and simple. If a plant's not green, it's probably a little low on the nitrogen. Granted, some plants have different colors in them, but for the most part, green is the important color that you look for in a healthy plant. Now, another thing that nitrogen does is it's involved in the food production. It helps to make the starches and the sugars and the oils that the plant produces. Now, another thing that we'll notice about nitrogen is if you have too little nitrogen, one of the things that you'll notice with your plant is the older leaves tend to turn yellow. That's because with too little nitrogen, the chloroplasts in the plant, which is what produces the chlorophyll, tends to get destroyed. And therefore, you end up with yellow leaves. If you have too much nitrogen, you end up with that salt burn, because all fertilizers tend to deposit salts in the soil, and that ends up causing the plant to get a burn to it. So if we take another look now at nitrogen and what it does, it helps the plant to be leafy, helps the stems to grow, it keeps the color green the way it's supposed to be. So most all of the benefits from nitrogen happen above ground. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the second item of the macronutrients, the P, which is phosphorus. Phosphorus is involved in the infrastructure of the plant. What its main role is in early plant development and root growth. It also helps form the DNA and the RNA of the cells in the plants. Another thing that phosphorus does for the plants is it helps with water retention. What it does is it helps act like increasing the pump strength of the plant to uptake water and nutrients so that the plant can live and thrive. Another thing that phosphorus is very important for is the fertility of the plant. It's involved in flower and fruit production. So if you're having trouble getting your plants to produce flowers like they're supposed to, or if they won't produce the fruit the way they're supposed to, then a shortage of phosphorus most likely is one of the problems that you'll want to investigate. Now, something else that phosphorus is important for is energy conversion. It helps the energy transfer from the sun through photosynthesis to cell formation. And it also helps with the formation of sugars, starches, and oils. And finally, phosphorus is very important as a coping mechanism. It helps the plant deal with all the stresses that the environment puts on a plant, like drought, insects, and diseases. Many of the things that phosphorus does for the plant really takes place in the early stages when a plant is forming, helps it develop almost, if you will, like an immune system. Helps it get up and running. Because if you've got a healthy plant from the beginning of the life cycle, it's usually going to be able to ward off all the other problems that come along later in a plant life. So phosphorus is one of the things that you definitely want to make sure you have a good balance of. But we'll talk more about that later when we talk in the next section about the ratios that are involved in these. Okay, now we're going to talk about potassium, which is also referred to as the regulator in the plant. Potassium's very important in enzyme activation. It brings together all the different molecules in such a way to ensure that the chemical reactions that are necessary for plant growth take place. Potassium also plays a huge role in pH stabilization. Proper pH levels are required for enzyme reactions, the maximum ones anyway, and there's over 60 different enzyme reactions that take place in a plant. Potassium is also responsible for the stomatal activity, which are the pores of the plant. It helps with photosynthesis, water and nutrient transport, and cooling. Because during the times when it has to give off carbon dioxide and take in oxygen through the roots, it's very, very important. Now, potassium also plays a role in protein synthesis. It reads the genetic code to produce enzymes and proteins. It's really the foreman on this job site. And finally, potassium is responsible for starch production. It activates the enzyme itself that produces starch. And without starch, you would have no end crop production, and the plant would never be ready for the winter cycle. So potassium probably plays one of the biggest roles in the overall functioning of a plant out of the three that of the macronutrients. So now that we know a little bit about NPK, check out our next series where we go a little further into the macronutrients and we discover what the ratios are. We talk about how the different levels of the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium are combined in fertilizers, something like this, and what the different balances can do for a plant, how they can help and how they can hurt. If you like this video, please subscribe and then check out all the other videos that we have in our series of Understanding Plants 101. And I highly recommend that you go on to the next one, which is Macronutrients by the Numbers. Now you know.